So good morning, whatever time of day it is for you, and welcome to Philosophy Live. I'm Graham Blackbourn from the Scottish branch of the School of Philosophy and Economic Science in Edinburgh. Thank you for joining me. Today I'd like to explore, very briefly, the history and workings of this instrument, the astrolabe, and the involvement of two remarkable women. The word astrolabe comes from the Greek for star taker, and it was indeed first developed in the ancient Greek world. A precursor to the astrolabe was the armillary sphere. You've probably seen such things in a museum or modern sculptures. They are essentially a model of the revolution of the heavenly bodies, with, in ancient times, as shown here, the Earth at its centre. The Greek astronomer Hipparchus in the 2nd century BC credited Eratosthenes, who lived a century earlier, with the invention of the armillary sphere. Ptolemy, in the 2nd century AD, possibly the greatest astronomer of the ancient world, is sometimes credited with having invented the astrolabe. There's a story, certainly apocryphal but illustrative, that Ptolemy was riding his horse one day carrying an armillary sphere when the horse stumbled, causing the sphere to be dropped, and the horse then stood on it and crushed the sphere, resulting in a flat instrument which gave rise to the astrolabe. Ptolemy mentioned his instrument in his magisterial work, the Almagest, the greatest work of astronomy to emerge from the classical world, although it's not entirely clear whether this was a planar instrument like later astrolabes. For this we need to move on to the first of our two remarkable women, Hypatia of Alexandria. Hypatia was born between 350 and 370 AD and died tragically in 415. She was the daughter of Theon, a prominent mathematician and Neoplatonic philosopher. Hypatia followed her father in both fields, and it seemed that Hypatia was surpassing her father. It's widely thought that that she edited the only then surviving text of Ptolemy's Almagest, with its mention of the astrolabe. Hypatia also made scientific instruments, and the earliest known certain reference to the plain astrolabe is in a letter from Bishop Synesius of Cyrene, a contemporary of Hypatia, describing how she had taught him how to construct a silver plain astrolabe. Hypatia is the first of my two remarkable women related to the story of the astrolabe. But since there's been a previous Philosophy Live devoted to her, I'll leave it at that. But do look her up. After the Roman Emperor Justinian closed all schools of philosophy in the 6th century, scientific study, which at that time was seen as a branch of philosophy, moved eastwards to what was to become the Islamic world, and with it the knowledge of the astrolabe. We don't really know, but it seems likely that the instrument at that time was still fairly basic, a flattened armillary sphere, as it were, used for measuring angles and depicting the position and rotation of the stars. Now, Muslims pray at 5 times each day, determined by the position of the sun, while facing Mecca. And they also need to determine the dates of, for example, the onset of Ramadan and Eid. And it was partly these needs which inspired their further refinement of the astrolabe. Several Islamic scholars contributed to these developments. But here I must introduce our second remarkable woman, Maryam al-Ijliyah, who bears several striking similarities to Hypatia of Alexandria. Like Hypatia, Maryam followed in the footsteps of, but later surpassed, an illustrious father. Like Hypatia, she was a brilliant mathematician. And also like Hypatia, she is remembered more for the immense respect and admiration which she was afforded in her lifetime, rather than for what little we actually know about her story. The several sources I found, and I'm no Arabic scholar, contain varying biographies, so I cannot vouch for the accuracy of even the few words I will say about Maryam, but I hope they paint a fair picture. Maryam, it seems, was born in Syria during the 10th century. She learned from her father, himself an astrolabe maker, But Mariam had remarkable abilities as both a mathematician, despite no formal education, and as a craftswoman. And she was able both to undertake the calculations necessary for charting the movements of the heavenly bodies and to etch them onto her instruments with extraordinary precision. She so impressed the founder of the Emirate of Aleppo, Saif al-Dawla, that he employed her at his court, where she also helped to refine techniques used for navigation and timekeeping. Owing to her association with astrolabes, Mariam became known as Mariam al-Astrolabe. Once astrolabes, were reintroduced from the Islamic world to the Western Europe, sometime in the 12th century perhaps, Mariam's innovations were carried there. Few of us nowadays realize how widespread the use of astrolabes was throughout Europe in later medieval times. The earliest surviving instruction manual for the use in English was one which Geoffrey Chaucer wrote in the 14th century for his 11-year-old son. Surviving ancient astrolabes are inevitably mostly made of metal, typically brass, but much more common were those of wood or even paper. Chaucer's son probably had a paper astrolabe. One thing I love about astrolabes is how they bring together different worlds in several ways. Firstly, historically, they emerged in the Greco-Roman world and were perfected in the Islamic world before finally being reintroduced to the world of medieval Europe. Astrolabes are also made in India and China. The names of the parts of the astrolabe, the Greek star taker, reflect this history. Let's have a quick look at one. Here's a modern wooden astrolabe. Its main body is called the mater, or Latin and Arabic respectively for mother. Within the mater is a circular recess, the womb, within which an elaborate cut-out disc rotates, with the sun and stars marked on it, together with the circle which represents the ecliptic, the circle through the heavens which the sun passes through within a year. This rotating disc is called either by the Latin rete, meaning a net, or the Arabic ankabut, which is a spider. Over the rete is a revolving ruler, but beneath it is a plate which can be removed and replaced depending on the latitude you're in. I know you can't see this very clearly, but I have another copy here. And this one is made for a latitude of 55.9 north, which happens to be valid for Linlithgow, where I live. And the line here, I know you can just see it, but this line represents the horizon, the local horizon. In the middle is a spot which represents vertically upwards, and there's various lines between the two which represent the angle from the horizon of any heavenly body that's being looked at. I'll come back in a moment to how that works. On the back of the astrolabe is another rotating ruler, but this one has a couple of tabs on with holes in, and you can use these holes to, by holding up vertically the astrolabe, to align and measure the angle to any heavenly body, such as the sun. This ruler here is called an alidade, or the alidada, from the Arabic al-adid, which means the forearm, because of the way that the forearm rotates around the elbow, just in the same way as the alidada rotates. So the named parts of the astrolabe are themselves a meeting of the worlds, coming variously from the Greek, Latin, and Arabic. Now, an 11th century text told how an astrolabe has 1,000 different uses. And in the short time left, I will attempt to illustrate just one, how to tell the time. Firstly, use the alidade on the back to line up, and there's a a calendar here with all the months of the year, and today is July the 4th. I know you can't see this, but if I put that on July the 4th, I can measure on the outside the star date. These are the various star signs, and I can see that we're now about 12 degrees into the star sign of Cancer. So remember that. And I can also, by holding it up, measure the angle of the sun. Now, as it happens, I can't see the sun in my room, and it's overcast in any case, but I checked up earlier, the sun at the moment is about 31 degrees above the horizon. So I can now turn the astrolabe around, and first of all, on the ecliptic, on the Reti, I have to find where it's marked that we're 12 degrees into the star sign of Cancer. And I've cheated by putting a little red marker on today's star sign, 12 degrees into Cancer. And then all I need to do is to rotate the Reti until it matches on the underlying plate the angle above the horizon related to 31 degrees where the sun now sits. And I know you can't see it, but if I move it there, there's a line there representing 30 degrees. So just above that is 31 degrees. And then all I have to do is move this ruler to where that marker now sits and read on the outside, hope it's going to work, the time. Here's the time, 24-hour clock in Roman numerals, and it says 7, it's about 7:35 to 7:40. So that's the time, 7:35 to 7:40 in the morning. Now, if you're watching live in the UK, you might say, hang on, that's not the right time, but you have to remember to add an hour for British summertime. So about 8:35 to 8:40. Well, that's my excuse for overrunning slightly, but within a few minutes, that's the correct time. So I think that's quite impressive. And that's just one out of the 1,000 things that one can do with the astrolabe. And I'm told that with practice, one can find the time within about 7 seconds using that. At night time, by the way, you can also find the time in a similar way by using where the stars are on the Reti there. So because of the multiple uses, the astrolabe has been called the medieval smartphone. But I disagree. Most smartphone users I see seem lost in a small world of their own, fixated by their screens. In contrast, when I try using the astrolabe, I find myself increasingly aware of the world and the heavens around me, intimately connected with the sun and the stars. And I use them to tell the time or fix a direction. And this is yet another way in which the astrolabe embodies a meeting of worlds. I find it expands my horizons, bringing my often small world into contact with a much larger one. I can see why the two remarkable women I've mentioned, Hypatia of Alexandria and Mariam al-Astrolabe, were both so enchanted with this wonderful instrument. I'd heartily recommend having a go at using the astrolabe for reconnecting with the cosmos. So here's how philosophy might help us today. And thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you again next Friday for another philosophical gem. Thanks again. Have a good day and enjoy your weekend.